Several years ago, when I first moved to Orange County, I had an opportunity to listen to a podcast. It was the first time I'd heard one. It was Diane Bass. She was being interviewed by another defense attorney talking about her practice, and I reached out to her, and we have been friends now for how many years?
Several years now.
Several years.
How many? At least 5.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming over and giving us an opportunity to work together with you. But why don't you tell our audience a little bit about the practice that you've built and the types of people you're working with today?
Sure. So I've been a criminal defense attorney for about 25 years, and I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the federal panel in Santa Ana, California. So I was able to have the opportunity to work on every kind of federal case under the stars. And so it was an extraordinary learning opportunity. And I left the panel several years later, and I'm mostly doing private cases, mostly white collar cases. And it's been an extraordinary ride. I absolutely love it.
Have you ever, you said that you previously worked for the panel. Did you ever work as a prosecutor?
Never. I have never been a prosecutor. I am a true believer, dyed-in-the-wool defense attorney.
But you operate in both state and federal courts.
Yes, that's correct.
So we had the opportunity to start working together because I wanted to help you understand the prison system and the different ways that you as a defense attorney can influence a person's journey through prison. What experience do you have, or how do you counsel your clients with regard to getting ready for the entire journey from the time they learn they are a defendant to the time they get out of the system?
So I want to backtrack to when we first met. We had a 4-hour lunch the first time we met, and you told me your amazing story, and you wanted to help me with mitigation. And my attitude at that time was, I'm really good at that. I don't need any help. And you were like, just give me a shot. And of course, I've had extraordinary results working with you, with my clients. And so I've incorporated a lot of what I have learned from you. But certainly if my clients can afford to hire you, I encourage them to do so, because I think that what you and your team contribute to somebody's defense is invaluable. But my approach is, if someone is under investigation, and I believe that they have actually done something that is going to end up as a criminal case, I encourage them to get in as quickly as possible, to cooperate if they have information, if they can, but at the very least to waive indictment so that they can get a pre-indictment deal. But I also have them start working on their story, their narrative, their mitigation right from the beginning. So I want, again, if they can't afford to hire you guys to do their narrative, I have them work on their narrative, and I work on it with them, and make sure that they are at least putting money away for restitution if they can, that they are doing some sort of community service, and that they are really looking at what led them to where they are going to go. I spend a lot of time preparing them for the pre-sentence interview because, as you and I have discussed at length, the PSR is everything. And what I learned from you specifically is not just how the PSR affects them at sentencing, but how powerful it is for them when they're in prison and when they're on supervision after they get out of prison. And that I was not aware of.
When you meet with a client, what stage generally are they in the proceedings? Did they just learn that they had become investigated, or had they been charged? At what stage typically do clients come to you?
Typically, they'll come to me when they find out they're under investigation, either after a search warrant's been executed, or they caught wind of some information, or their bank account was frozen. Those are generally when the majority of my clients come to me. Some clients come to me after they've been charged, and they've been either assigned a public defender or an appointed counsel, or occasionally people will come to me from another lawyer who they don't feel really has their best interests at heart.
One of the areas that might be of interest to people is even how does a government investigation typically begin? In your experience, could you give us some background on how government investigations start? Because people typically don't even know they're under investigation. What experience do you have that somebody should be thinking about, is this something I should be concerned about?
That's a really good question. I have to think about that. I think that, oftentimes it's a cooperator. So somebody else gets caught doing something, and then they are going to tell the U.S. attorneys working on the case, so-and-so is also involved with that. There can sometimes be victims who complain, and most of the time, I would say at least 50% of the time, people will find out that they're under investigation because their bank account gets frozen.
I think that that's something that people should be thinking about, particularly during this era of trillions of dollars being dispersed by the federal government. There are a lot of people that don't recognize some of the decisions that they make can expose them to a government investigation. And one area that I think people should learn from is that government investigations typically begin in secret, and something's going on behind the scenes. Either somebody's investigating bank records, or a bank might have to report something, how money is being taken out from a PPP loan disbursement or an EIDL loan from the SBA, and somebody, instead of using that money for legitimate purposes, is buying a boat or a new house or going on a trip, and the bank has a responsibility to report that. A lot of times that's one area that investigations have begun. If people understand there's a body of evidence being accumulated long before the government comes to them. I think the reason that behind my question for you, Diane, is by the time a government investigation starts, how much does the government already know?
By the time you find out you're under investigation, they already know almost everything. And the only thing that they need you for at that point is to maybe fill in a couple of the puzzle pieces. But, your bank records, if you are committing fraud, if you are engaged in criminal conduct, you have to expect somebody from the U.S. government to be looking at your bank records. So if you are taking, say, investor money for some sort of an investment that you are promoting, and you are spending that money on paying your mortgage and your pool guy, the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to know about that. The FBI, the IRS, whatever agency is looking at you are going to get those records, and they're going to know exactly where the money came from and exactly where the money went. And for instance, you mentioned the PPP loans. A lot of people are feeling like, well, the government's just giving away this money. I want a piece of it, right? And they're just fudging the numbers. And when I say fudging the numbers, I have one client who completely created all of the documents, all of the tax records and everything. And then there are other people that may just say they're making more than they're making, or they may change a number on their IRS form, on their tax form, and they get caught. The cases that I have right now I have one $1.5 million PPP loan fraud, a couple of $300,000 PPP loan frauds. But, people, I guess, think that, well, I'm just not going to get caught. There's definitely some of that. People do put their head in the ground, and they just kind of, well, I would never do anything wrong, but I'm just going to, and they end up in federal prison. So,
yeah, the reality is that people that are non-criminogenic don't see themselves as being the target of an investigation. And I think that's the real value that you provide in helping individuals understand you want to cooperate, you want to be honest, and you want to try and mitigate at the soonest possible time. A lot of times people have a hard time with that because they come to you and they don't recognize how much the government already has against them. And so more often than not, well, I don't know if it's more often than not, but certainly I've spoken with a lot of people that it's not only the underlying crime that gets them into trouble, it's their response. Yes. When they lie, when they mislead, when they say they didn't do it, and the government is just accumulating more evidence against them. And that can later come back to haunt somebody on these enhancements.
Well, yeah, they get charged with obstruction of justice. Yeah, so if an agent comes to you and asks you questions and you lie to them, they will charge you and you get another 2 levels for obstruction.
Or an entirely new charge. And I mean, a lot of people know Martha Stewart went to prison. They think that she went to prison for securities fraud, but she actually went to prison because of the way she responded to a government investigation. So you don't have to talk to the government, but if you do, you better tell the truth, Yes. And so it's really helpful, I think, when they find an attorney who's honest with them and helps people understand the groundwork of what's coming, and then figure out what can I do to make things better. And I know that's an area that you've got real expertise in helping people, particularly people here in Orange County. And you recently had a phenomenal outcome for one of your clients. And I think we should probably do that in a subsequent video, because that story bears telling in and of itself. But why don't you just give them a teaser of what the allegation was and what the sanction that you were successful in getting for this person.
So this woman came to me, actually, you referred her to me, and she was charged with a $50 million EB-5 visa fraud case. She was an immigration attorney, and the sentence that I was able to obtain for her was a 1 day with credit time served sentence and 3 years of supervised release. And I believe that that was the appropriate outcome for the case.
And that is the result of good mitigation, good counseling. It's a lot more than just having a lawyer that's going to promise you that there's a big difference between an indictment and a conviction. It's a lot more about talking about the whole life plan. And Diane Bass is an expert in that. That's why I always recommend, if a client is charged with a federal crime, they need an honest lawyer, and they can't do better than Diane Bass. And in the next episode, we're going to talk specifically about what is EB-5 fraud, what does it mean to be participating in a $50 million case, and what do the guidelines suggest for something like that. So stay tuned for the next episode.